As Connie said earlier, I don't often do special messages on Palm Sunday. I have on Easter and on Christmas, but not on Palm Sunday. And so I thought this year, why not? Let's learn a little bit. And I did. Do you know that there were 2 times that the Bible records that Jesus cried? One was when he arrived at the tomb of Lazarus, and he knew that Lazarus was dead, sleeping. The other time was during the triumphal entry, when he beheld the city, and he wept. Now in English, we think of the word wept, we think of somebody off in a corner quietly, maybe hunching their shoulders a little bit, crying quietly to them. That's not what the word in Greek means. It's kleio, which means to cry and show every external sign of emotion, including the shedding of tears. So when Jesus wept over Lazarus and over the city of Jerusalem, he was crying. It's hard for us to imagine Jesus crying, but he did. Now that's the last I'm going to mention of his crying during this message. But the reason is because I don't want to focus so much on Jesus as I want to focus on the people. Because we are not Jesus, we are the people. So how can we read this and learn something to apply to our own lives? Well, 2,000 years ago, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. And this day has become known as Palm Sunday, probably because, as John tells us in his gospel account, the large crowd who had come to the feast when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem took the branches of palm trees and went out to meet him. Now, palm branches are a symbol of victory and triumph, and they were often used in celebrations. Also, according to John, they proclaimed, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now the word Hosanna is Hebrew, it's actually Chaldean, and it means save now. It's not a request, it's a command. It's saying, God, save us now. That's what Hosanna meant. But why? Why all the hubbub about this itinerant preacher? Yes, it's true, he performed a few miracles, particularly in the area around Jerusalem, but he's not the only one that performed miracles. Moses performed miracles, Elijah performed miracles, Elisha performed miracles, and nobody ever said that he was the Messiah. They were the Messiah. And yet, Jesus now, suddenly, they're saying that about him. Perhaps they heard about the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus took 5 barley loaves and a few fishes, and he distributed them out to these 5,000 men plus women and children. So we say it was feeding of the 5,000, but it was probably more like feeding of the 12,000. And they took up a bunch afterwards, far more than they started out with. Now that was a miracle to behold. In fact, here's what John said after he'd performed that particular miracle. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had done, they were saying, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. So Jesus, knowing that they were going to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew into the mountain by himself alone. So he knew that the people were ready to make him the king right then and there, just because he had fed a few people, more than a few. Well, perhaps in this crowd in Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday, perhaps there were some Jewish people, the leaders, scholars, that had read Daniel's prophecies and had calculated when the Messiah was going to come based on Daniel. And we will get into that in more detail in just a minute. The Jewish people had been living for centuries under the thumb first of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. And in fact, the Romans had been treating them so badly that they taxed them unmercifully. They treated them, as I said in the notes, like the scum of the earth, and yet their prophets proclaimed that their Messiah would come. And when he did, there would be no end to the increase of his government or of peace. He would sit on the throne of David. He would establish his kingdom and uphold it with justice and righteousness, and it would last forever. Now, of course, the people who were being oppressed would be looking forward to that. So everybody who is a Jewish believer knew about the coming Messiah. In the Old Testament, there are more than 300 prophecies about the Messiah. I've read some places there were 348 prophecies. I heard there are 328. I've heard in other places there were more than 300. That's one I can live with, because I don't know if I could go through and specifically count every single one. Now, we're not going to go through all of them. We're not even going to go through most of them. We're just going to go through some that are the most important and most instrumental to this particular message. We'll start with Zechariah. Zechariah is the one who prophesied specifically about this triumphal entry. He said, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Make a loud shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and endowed with salvation, lowly and mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a pack animal." And in fact, that's exactly the way he came into town. It's not the way the kings of the earth would come into town, but it's the way that Jesus came. In the Psalms, there are several places in Psalms that talk about the Messiah. In Psalms 2, it says, "I will surely tell of the decree of Yahweh. He said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give you the nations as your inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them with a potter's vessel.'" So the Jewish people saw their coming Messiah as a powerful, strong king. And in Psalms 118, it says, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone." This is from Yahweh. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that Yahweh has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. O Yahweh, save. In other words, Hosanna. O Yahweh, succeed. Blessed is the one that comes in the name of Yahweh. We have blessed you from the house of Yahweh. And of course, Isaiah wrote extensively about the Messiah. Here are a couple of the prophecies that he wrote down. In Isaiah chapter 9, "The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in the land of the shadow of death, the light will shine on them." And that land specifically that he was talking about was the area around Galilee, around Nazareth. Why would that be important? Well, we all know why. "You shall multiply the nation. You shall make great their gladness, and they will be glad in your presence as with the gladness of harvest." Why was the harvest such a glad celebration? Have any of you ever raised your own food? I don't mean just a garden. We have a garden too. But if you, for instance, if you raise your own wheat, you have to go out and you have to cut it down. Then you have to go through and thresh it to knock all the wheat berries off. Then you have to winnow it to get all the chaff away from the berries. And then you have to grind the berries and make it into flour and eat it. And believe me, homemade bread from your own homegrown wheat is delicious. The problem is you never think you have enough. So when time to plant more wheat comes, you're almost out of what you already harvested. And you can't wait until this new crop finally gets mature enough to harvest. So of course there's gladness. They will be glad in your presence as with the gladness of harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For you shall shatter the yoke of their burden, and the staff on their shoulders, the rod of their taskmasters, as at the battle of Midian. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. And there will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on forevermore. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will accomplish this. So several times the Jewish people were told, when your Messiah comes, he will rule and he will reign on the throne of David forever. It's not going to come to an end. It's going to go on and on. Later in Isaiah, he said, the Spirit of Lord Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has appointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of Yahweh and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn. Does anybody remember when that prophecy was fulfilled? Jesus in Nazareth, after he had begun his ministry, went into the synagogue and was asked to read the scripture. And they handed him the scroll of Isaiah, and he read, the Spirit of the Lord Yahweh is on me, because Yahweh has appointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of Yahweh. So he knew that that was a prophecy about himself, and he owned it. Now, these prophecies that I've read, and others, predicted the Messiah would come and conquer the enemies of the Jews. He would set them free, and he would bring in everlasting peace. But there are other messianic prophecies that don't say that. And that's what had so many of the Jews confused. For instance, Daniel chapter 9. So you are to know and have insight that from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be restored and rebuilt with plaza and moat, even in the times of distress. That sounds like a good prophecy, but it goes on. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Well, how can the Jews interpret that? This is their Messiah who's going to reign and rule forever, and yet it says he'll be cut off. And in Isaiah, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. That doesn't sound like the Messiah that was going to come and conquer the world and bring in peace. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The cleansing of the chastening of our peace fell upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but Yahweh has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment He was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, that for the transgression of my people striking was due to him? So his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. But Yahweh was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If you would place his soul as a guilt offering, he will see his seed. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of Yahweh will succeed in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. And by his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will divide for him a portion with the many, and he will divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sin of many and interceded for the transgressors. Now, if you're a first century Jew reading this, that's not the Messiah you want to read about. That doesn't sound like fun at all. It sounds like he's going to suffer and go through pain and torment. But from this side of the cross, we can look back and read that with joy, because we know that that suffering of the Jewish Messiah was to pay for my sins and your sins. So now let's look again at what Zechariah said of the coming king. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Make a loud shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and endowed with salvation, lowly and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a pack animal. So we see our Redeemer, the Jewish Messiah who paid for our sin, coming into town as a humble, lowly servant. Now, perhaps the people believed this was their Messiah. That's why they greeted him as they did. But he came in such a humble manner. Could this really be their king? Here's how the four gospel writers describe his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And I'm going to read through all four of these just so we get a picture of how his disciples saw him. And when they had approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey colt tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, you shall say, The Lord has need of them. And immediately he will send them. And this took place in order that what was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled, saying, Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you lowly and mounted on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a pack animal. And the disciples went and did just as Jesus had instructed them. And they brought the donkey and the colt and laid their garments on them, and he sat on the garments. And most of the crowd spread their garments on the road, and others were cutting down branches from the trees and spreading them on the road. And the crowds going ahead of him and those who followed were crying out, saying, Hosanna! Lord, save! Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest! And when he had entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, Who is this? And the crowds were saying, This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee. They still hadn't made that switch in their mind from the fact that he was a prophet to the fact that he was their Messiah. Here's how Mark described it. And as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, Go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter in, you'll find a colt tied there, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone says to you, Why are you doing this? You say, The Lord has need of it. And immediately he will send it back here. And they went away and found a colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of the bystanders were saying to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" And they spoke to them just as Jesus had told them, and they gave them permission. And they brought the colt to Jesus and put their garments on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their garments in the road, and others spread leafy branches, having cut them from the fields. And those who went in front and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." And Mark was the one who wrote everything briefly, and yet he said all of that. And this is how Luke said, after he had said these things, he was going on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. And it happened that when he approached Bethphage and Bethany, near the mount called of Olives, he sent two of the disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, in which, as you enter, you will find a colt tied on which no one yet has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this, 'Because the Lord has need of it.'" So when those who were sent departed, they found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus. And after they threw their garments on the colt, they put Jesus on it. And as he was going, they were spreading their garments on the road. Now as soon as he was approaching, near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God, rejoicing with a loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven, glory in the highest." Then John said this, "On the next day, the large crowd who had come to the feast," and this was the feast of the Passover, "when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began to shout, 'Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel.' And Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it, as it was written, 'Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt.'" These things his disciples did not understand at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, so that they had done these things to him. So the crowd who was with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness about him. For this reason also the crowd went and met him, because they had heard that he had done this sign. Okay, that's what the four gospel writers said, and you can go back through and read through those again and again and again, and every time you read through them, I guarantee you, you will see something new. There is so much in there that we always just gloss over. But let's talk about what we do know about this Messiah. Well, we can tell from a number of facts that the Jews were expecting the Messiah to arrive at any moment. Well, we already mentioned Daniel's prophecy. "So you are to know and have insight that from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now, there were actually 4 decrees that were given by the Persian kings during Daniel's life in Persia. And if you look at them, only the 4th of those satisfies this prophecy. He's the only one that sent them back to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And that was done by Artaxerxes Longimanus. Boy, you think you have a terrible last name. Longimanus. It literally means long-handed. And his decree occurred in 445 BC. Now, the original Chaldean text that this was translated from literally says 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Now, it was commonly believed among first century Jews that this referred to sevens of years, or weeks of years. And that's why our translation says weeks. The Chaldean year of Daniel's day was 360 days long, which meant that every 5 or 6 years, they had to add an extra 30-day month in there to keep the calendar aligned with the sun, because we know there are 365 and a quarter days. The Chaldean year of Daniel's day was 12 months of 30 days each, with 1 month added in occasionally. We would call that a leap month, which is the same calendar that the first century Jews used. Now, those of you who have always loved math, like me, there are a few of you out there, very few I'm sure, bear with me for a few minutes. We're going to go through some calculations here, but I'm going to do all the hard work for you. 69 weeks of a Chaldean year is equal to 173,880 days, which equates to 476 of our solar years, plus an additional 21 days. Now, if we take 445 BC as a starting point, that brings us to the year AD 30. If you don't find that amazing, then I don't know what will. Now, first of all, if you were to go through and do that calculation yourself, you need to be aware that there was no year zero. It went from 2 BC to 1 BC to AD 1. So when you do your calculations, you have to subtract that 1 year out. Christ was approximately 30 years old when he began his ministry, according to Luke 3:23, and his ministry lasted for a little more than 3 years. Now, if we work back from that, it would lead to a date of 4 BC for his birth. But why is it 4 years off? Doesn't our calendar start with the year that Jesus was born? Well, no. In about AD 523, a monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus. You will never remember that name, but you may remember his English equivalent, Dennis the Little. He calculated the date of Christ's birth as 25 December 753 AUC. That means from the year that Rome was founded. Thus having the year AD 1 begin on January 1st, 754 AUC. But he apparently made an error in his calculations, because we know that Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod the Great, who died in the year 750 AUC. That is approximately 4 BC. So, by this reckoning, it would make the birth of Christ around 4 BC and the date of the crucifixion approximately AD 30. Now, going back to Daniel's prophecy and doing all the appropriate calculations, which I've already done for you, we arrive at the date of approximately AD 30 as the year of the arrival of Messiah the Prince. The Jews of the first century, especially the religious leaders, had also done the calculations and were well aware that the arrival of their Messiah was imminent. But that's not all. We have the witness of the Scriptures as well. In Matthew 11:3 and in Luke 7:19 through 20, we learn that John the Baptist was also expecting the Messiah. He even sent 2 of his disciples to ask Jesus if he was the one they were waiting for. Also, after his resurrection, Jesus joined 2 disciples who were walking to the town of Emmaus. Here's the conversation they had as recorded in Luke's Gospel. And I love Jesus' sarcasm in this. If you think he was never sarcastic, listen carefully. And he said to them, "What are these words that you're discussing with one another as you're walking?" And they stood still, looking sad. And one of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet in deed and work in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel." And according to Luke 19:11, the people listening to Jesus telling parables previous to that thought the kingdom of heaven was going to appear immediately. These facts could easily explain why the crowds were waving palm branches and proclaiming, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They believed that this was their Messiah. Well, so what? Hopefully this makes sense to you. The people were excited because their long-awaited Messiah had finally come. And yet, a mere 5 days later, the religious leaders, the one who should have been most aware that this was indeed the Messiah, responded to him this way. Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify! Crucify!" And when Pilate had found no reason for condemnation of Jesus, he wanted to release him. But the crowds are the ones that responded this time. And answering again, Pilate was saying to them, "Then what shall I do with him whom you call King of the Jews?" And they shouted again, "Crucify him!" But Pilate was saying to them, "Why? What evil did he do?" And they shouted the more, "Crucify him!" We know it's easy for us to sit here in our comfortable 21st century homes to be critical of the Jewish people. One minute they were proclaiming to their king, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And a mere 5 days later, they were shouting, "Crucify him." In their religious zeal, they proclaimed what the scriptures had taught them, but having become embroiled again in the world system, listening to their own selfish desires and the words of those around him, they rejected the very one who they claimed as their king. Now, before we get too harsh on these first century Jews, are we not guilty of the same duplicity at times? After spending an hour with our brothers and sisters, being bathed by the word, singing praises to God who saved us by his grace, do we sometimes go out into the world and blend in as if we belong there? Does our everyday language reflect the fact that we are supposed to be in the world, but not of the world? Finally, consider this. The same Jews who proclaimed, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," believed Jesus to be their Messiah. But they expected him to immediately destroy Rome and set the Jews free. They had unreal expectations. And when their expectations were not met, they shouted, "Crucify him." I'm sure some of them were saying, "He's an imposter." Do we have unreal expectations of our Lord? Are we disappointed because he has not done for us what we wanted and expected him to do? Are we willing to let God do things his own way and in his own time? Now, consider this. When Caesar entered Rome after defeating his enemies, he entered the city with a victory parade. This was a grand procession celebrating the military victory and Caesar's glory. The parade started outside the city at the Porta Triumphalis, then proceeded through the Campus Martius and Via Sacra to the Temple of Jupiter. It included musicians, entertainers, various groups of people, and objects, including prisoners of war and the spoils of victory. The victorious Caesar was in a 4-horse chariot, dressed in purple and adorned with symbols of victory. The triumphal entrance was a grand celebration of military prowess and the glory of Rome. It was a self-glorifying event for Caesar's ego. And when Napoleon entered Paris after his military victories, it involved a parade with large numbers of captured soldiers along with artillery. The parade began at the Arc de Triomphe. Many of you know where that is in Paris. Napoleon built the Arc de Triomphe for this very purpose. It was accompanied by music, cheering crowds, and sometimes even torch-lit processions, creating a festive atmosphere. And the parade served as a way to reinforce Napoleon's authority and to solidify his position as emperor. And it was for Napoleon's ego. But Jesus ended up being a disappointment to his people. Why? Because he was not what they expected him to be, or what they wanted. After all, he was not the conquering Messiah they wanted him to be, but he was the lowly servant the Father wanted him to be. So let me ask you, are you okay with letting God do things his way and in his time? Or are you still trying to be a Christian on your own terms? Let's pray.